Hey, welcome back to the Cloud Developer channel. In the last videos, I showed you how to build an Angular application using Semantic UI, CSS, and JavaScript framework. And we went through a few different areas of how to actually make the application a little bit more robust by separating it out into separate components. In today's video, I'm going to actually take this website apart a little bit and show you how to make it actually look better, as well as make it more functional. And we'll go ahead and get started by first taking the existing application that I have running on my screen right now, and we're going to go ahead and clean the content up and start replacing it with content that I've been working on by building a couple of images, because I don't want to spend a lot of your time trying to show you how to actually build images. That's something that is very interesting as a topic as well, but something outside the scope of this video. So the first item I'm going to show you how to do is we're going to go ahead and update to the favorite icon file that gets saved and shown also in the browser. So you can see right now it's actually defaulted to the AngularJS application icon. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and replace that with the image that I have created specifically for my site. Now, this is basically just me turning this logo that I have here, that is a PNG, into an icon file. And I just Googled for how to turn PNGs into icon files. And there are many different ways of doing that. So basically what you need to do is you need to go to the source folder of your application. And in this case, there's a file called faveicon.ico. And you just replace it with the content that you want to be used for your application. So as soon as I did that, even though it doesn't really refresh, I can go ahead and actually show you here. And you can see that the image actually looks similar to the one that we have now. It's a lot lower quality. And if I refresh the browser, you'll actually notice that it changes now to the icon that I have specified. Now, the next item that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and replace some of the files that I have inside of the assets folder here. And I only have the logo PNG file here. And I've gone ahead and created a few different other files that I'm going to need for this particular set of changes that I'm going to be making. So the first item I'm going to show you is there's a logo file. This is actually being replaced now. Before it was that picture that I just used for the favorites icon itself. And then the next item is going to be the main body, which is going to be used inside of the content that we're going to be creating. There's also a profile that we're not going to be using at the moment. The white background is going to be actually used as a header. The YouTube Angular card, ASP.NET Core, PowerShell, and Visual Studio card, those are just the application logos that I'm going to be using for this video. So now that the images are here, let's go ahead and get started by making some changes to the content. Now, what I do have right now is I already have ng server or serve actually running, and it's actually serving my website here. And as you can see, it already replaced the actual logo here on the website. So, but what I want to do now is I actually want to start cleaning up this content so I can put in the content that I want to have on my website. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and start cleaning up the CSS files as well as the HTML files from the respective elements. So in this case, I just cleared the components, the content component CSS, and I'm deleting the footer component content, and this is the header content. So I've gone ahead and cleaned all of that up. I'll go ahead and actually close the files, and if I go back to my website, you'll notice that the content is actually blank. So if I go back to this application, there is nothing showing up here. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first item I'm going to get started on is I'm going to start creating the HTML content that is going to start representing my header. So I'll go ahead and open up the application header component HTML. And I already have a pre-created version of this, but I'll actually walk you through all the different steps that I'm taking here. So the first item I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a header tag here with a class of main header, and I'll go ahead and close that. And inside of that there's going to be a div with a class of logo, and that's actually going to hold the logo that I put into the assets folder here, which is actually the logo PNG file itself. So this is the content I'm going to display for you on the page. So if we go back to the page itself, you'll notice that there's nothing here still. So the reason for that is because we actually need to update the CSS in order to make it visible and relevant. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and create the class that's called main header. And we'll start off with putting in the information about our actual image, the background image that we want to have. And I'll go ahead and save this, and you'll notice that nothing shows up. And the reason for that is because it actually needs to know the size before it actually can display anything. So I'm going to go ahead and give it this element a height of 350 pixels. And as soon as I refresh this, you'll actually see that the image showed up. Now this is blurred image, and the purpose of that is so that we can clearly see the logo when it actually gets added to the page. So the next step I'm going to take is I'm going to go ahead and give it a background size of auto and contain. And the reason why you would do this is to ensure that when this image actually, if it needs to resize, it will actually be scaled appropriately within the actual page itself. I'm also going to specify the position top center. This is for positioning the actual content. And then we're going to specify background no repeat. And the reason why you would want to do this is so that the actual image itself doesn't repeat in any case whenever you actually start resizing the browser. And we're also going to specify the z-index here. Now the purpose of the z-index here is actually later on in the video we're going to be actually adding some content as well as a footer, and there's a particular effect we want to show for revealing the content inside of the footer itself. And the z-index is going to play a key role because we're going to want to actually have the main header and the content area actually overlay the footer to make it a reveal type of an effect, where the footer actually gets revealed instead of just being plain part of the content that shows up on the page. So if we save this and we try to resize this, this is nothing really interesting, and you'll notice that the actual content is moving. We have our image and everything is here. So let's continue. The other item that I actually want to add here, which is an important aspect to the design of this website, is the background attachment fixed. And the reason why you do this is as your content actually gets bigger, you don't actually, in this particular case, you'll see that when I'm scrolling, the actual image itself doesn't change. Doesn't actually move, but the content inside of the actual web page will actually move, and this will create an interesting effect that I'm going to show you later. So the next step is we're going to go ahead and add the logo for the clouddeveloper.io website itself, and we'll go ahead and create a class called logo. In this class we're going to specify the height and width. And the height is going to be 30 pixels, the width is going to be 100%, and that doesn't really show you anything. And the reason for that is because we actually need to specify the background image and a couple of other attributes related to the image itself. And I'll go ahead and paste those in here. And what they are is basically a reference to the actual image itself. We're going to say don't repeat this image, and then set the background size to 650 pixels wide and 30 pixels tall. This will produce the perfect size for us for this logo itself. So let's go ahead and open this up, and you can see now that the actual PNG got overlaid here. So now what we want to do is we actually want to go ahead and center it, and as well as position it in the center of the actual content as well, not just in the center in x-axis. So let's go ahead and do that, and we do this by specifying a few additional attributes. The background position center, which will actually horizontally align the content. Then we're going to specify margin top minus 15 to actually bring the image a little bit up after the top 50% CSS style actually gets applied, which actually will push it down 50% down on the actual area inside of the div. So if we go back here, we'll actually see that the content actually moved down. So let's actually go ahead and do this here. And one of the things that I actually forgot is I forgot to add the position relative, which actually also allows us to change the way that the content inside of the actual main header element is getting positioned. So we want it to be relative to the actual positioning of the main header element itself. So as soon as I added this position relative element, you'll notice that it actually positioned it much better, actually vertically aligned as well. So this is all we wanted to do for the actual header of our website. So the next step we want to do is we actually want to go ahead and go to the content area of our website, and we'll go ahead and open up the content component. And here what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be creating 3 separate sections. The first section is going to be our kind of the story behind the website, and this is going to basically be a small paragraph that explains the purpose of the website. The second area is going to actually tell us, or basically it's kind of a separator, that is you're going to show you an image with a section header or an H1 tag that just has some wording in it to separate the next area from the main header area. And the main portion of the content for our website is going to be actually a set of links pointing back to the YouTube channel playlist videos or playlists themselves. And we'll show you what that looks like. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to actually introduce a div here and give it a class of content. Go ahead and close that out. And the next item we're going to do is we're going to start introducing those sections. So we'll be using the section HTML element, and you'll notice that I have the class section dark, and the reason for that is we actually want to make this particular portion of the content on our page actually dark. So the next 2 sections here, we don't actually need to have the class here, so I'll go ahead and remove that. And I'll go ahead and save it. So now since there's no content inside of those divs, nothing actually shows up. So let's go ahead and start populating the content in the first section. We'll do this by actually creating an article element. And in this article element, we're going to create an H1 tag that's actually going to be the header for the section that we're going to be displaying. And all it's going to do is it's just going to say the story. So if I refresh here, we'll see that the text shows up on the top left corner of this particular section. And the next couple of things I'm going to do is I'm going to actually copy and paste the content, which is going to be separated. Basically we have some text separated by some HR tags, and that's just creating some separation between the content. So as soon as I save that, you'll see that I have the actual header as well as the two HR tags, and then between the HR tags I have my content. There's just some wording in here. So this is it for this particular section, which is the story section. The next section is going to be our separation section, or section that's going to separate between the list of videos. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that entire section into this area here. And I'll go ahead and format it real quick. And what you'll notice is there's actually two sections. We don't need that. So I'll go ahead and format this here. And what you'll notice is basically it has an article element, and inside of that is a class that this article element is tagged with, which is coding fun, which is the name of this section. And inside of it, again, you'll see the pattern that I have a h1 tag, and all it does is just say coding is lots of fun. And the last section that is really the biggest piece of content that we have is the YouTube videos section. And in here, I'm going to walk you through, there's quite a bit of content in here, actually. So let me go ahead and copy this area first. And what you'll notice in here is actually quite a bit of content, and what we have in here is the actual article, just like we saw before. We have the h1 tag that represents the actual title of this section, and then we have a div class with a class, or a div element with a class of video content. This is just a container element for us, or basically is going to contain and allow us to control the positioning of the content a little bit better. Then we have a div that is marked with a class of UI, link, and cards. And what this is actually, let me show you, this is a feature of Semantic UI. And specifically, this is the card component within the Semantic UI. And what this is it allows you to create some pretty interesting looking content with pictures and other information that you want to present to users if you want to do more than just plain text. So specifically, what the look I'm looking for is something like this, where I have a few different cards. They have images to represent the actual type of videos I'm showing. So in my case, I'm doing ASP.NET MVC Core playlist, Angular playlist, PowerShell, as well as Visual Studio. And what I'll have is I'll have logos of each one of them show up here, as well as the title and the actual description of the playlist itself. And the user should be able to click on it and actually be taken to the actual website. So let me show you what that content actually looks like then. So the way you do this is you actually create this div with a class of UI and link with a class of cards as well. And then this actually creates the grouping for the 4 different cards that I'm going to be displaying. And then you actually go through and begin to define your actual cards themselves. So specifically, you'll create a div with a class of card. Inside of that, I actually created an href, or an anchor tag with an href. You give it a class of image, and then you actually give it the link you want to have the user navigate to. And I also specify the target _blank, which will cause it to open up in a new window or in a new tab. And then I point it to the actual image, and this image itself is actually specified inside of our assets folder here. And then this particular one, this is the ASP.NET Core card logo. So if we open this one up, this is the image it's actually going to be displaying. So once that's done, we'll go ahead and actually go to the next section, which is the div with a class of content. And this is actually going to represent the content area underneath the image itself. And what it does have is it has the actual anchor tag with a class of header. and this is actually a piece of text that's going to go ahead and show up that the user will be able to read. It has the link, which is the same link as the anchor tag above for the image. And then if we scroll to the right, again, it has the target of _blank, and then we actually give it the text that we want to display to the user. And then we also add underneath the anchor tag a div element with a class of description, and this is actually going to be describing the playlist that the user is going to be navigating to, or when they click, they know what they're clicking on from a playlist perspective. Now that basically comprises our entire card that's going to display, and this is actually something that's built in and provided to you by Semantic UI, so I don't have to style it, I don't have to worry about how to position everything. This is just basically coming out of the box, and there's no JavaScript required for this. This is actually using the CSS library that comes, or the framework that comes with Semantic UI. Now what I've done is I've copied and pasted this 4 different times, and I just adjusted the links as well as pointers to the actual images themselves, and I put in the specific names and the descriptions of the playlists. And as soon as I save it, and I'll go back to my UI, basically this is the content you end up seeing on the page. Now it already looks pretty good. Now some of the formatting for my sections is still not there, that's why you see it in this kind of format, but we'll fix that shortly. So the other thing you'll notice is actually positioned to the left, and we're going to need to reposition it a little bit to the center, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So let's go ahead and actually start focusing on the styling aspect of this particular component itself, which is the content component. So let me go ahead and close those other files, and I'll go ahead and open up the content component CSS file. So the first thing that we're going to get started with is we want to actually change the h1 tags for the actual content areas or the sections that we have to have them stand out a little bit. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go ahead and add a style for the h1, and we're going to give it a color of this orange value. And the reason we do that is because it actually will align with our logo itself, which you can see here. So now you can see that all of the h1 tags have this orange style, and I also give it a font weight to actually not make it as bold as it shows up for the h1 tag itself. So the next item that we're going to want to focus on is we're going to want to actually add the content class. And the content class is going to do a few different things for us. One is we did for the header, we actually specify the z index, and that's going to be important for the content and how it overlays the header. We're also going to make the background white. This is also critical for that effect for the footer. We're going to specify the margin bottom, and this will actually offset the position a little bit of the content area so that we can see that scrolling effect a little bit better. And then we're going to set the position relative as well. So if I save this, you'll see not much has really changed so far. So the next item we're going to focus on is we're going to go ahead and add the class that is section dark. And you can see right here that this entire section for the story itself is actually blending in with the white background that we have. And we want to actually have it stand out, as well as stand out a little bit from the actual header area as well. So by changing the background color to this other color, we actually are going to do that. So as soon as I refresh, you'll see that the content changed. Here you'll notice that we have also this white basically line going through here, and this is one of the HR tags that's producing this effect. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and fix that. So we fix that by actually adding a style for the HR tags themselves. And I'll go ahead and actually add that to the top here. And what this is doing is actually setting the border color to this color, which is darker gray color, the border style of solid, border width of 3, so it actually will make it a little bit wider in terms of the actual border itself. and margin left and right, and this is actually specifically so that when we actually center the content, you'll see later that the actual text is not aligning 100% on the left and right. So actually this white ruler itself is actually gonna hang off to the sides a little bit more, so which will create a nice effect as well. I'll go ahead and save this, and you'll see that the white line is actually kind of gone, and we have this more blurred and actually wider HR element that shows up on the page here, and you can't really see it easily here on the screen, but it is actually here in a different color as well. So this is a good starting point, but now what we want to do is we actually want to start formatting this story section to make it a little bit more presentable. And the way we do that is by adding another class here. And if you remember, in the HTML content, we actually called it the story as a class. So we'll go ahead and add that class here and save that. And what it does is basically it will make the text inside of that section italic. The font size is going to be increased to 20 pixels. We're going to change the color of that font or the text to this light gray color. We're going to give it a padding of 50 pixels top and bottom and 0 on the sides. And we're also going to specify the max width. And the reason why this is important is so that we can actually position it in the center better. And then margin 0 auto will actually force the positioning of the content inside of that section to the center, and text align center is actually going to force the H1 tag to align in the center as well. So I'll go ahead and save it. And as soon as we go back to the page, you can see that the content looks much better now. You'll see that we have some spacing on the top. We see we actually have some spacing on the bottom that actually creates good separation of the content. And the entire section actually, now that the text is showing up in a different color, it looks much better already. And this is the actual HR tags themselves. If you remember, I did the offset, and that's the effect that I was going for, is that the text content is not aligning directly. It's actually hanging off to the left and to the right a little bit. Okay, so the next area that we're going to focus on is this coding is lots of fun section. And all this is just creating a separator between the content here, the story section, as well as the actual playlists themselves. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually just apply some CSS styling that is related to the class that was applied to that section. And we'll start with this base class of coding fun. And what this is actually going to do for us is going to set the height to 170 pixels. We're going to specify a background image, which is going to be pointing to that main body 2 PNG, which is actually this image right here. And we're going to say go ahead and resize it automatically and contain it, basically scale it to the appropriate size of that div element. And then background repeat, no repeat, so that it basically never repeats that content. So as soon as I save it, you'll notice that the actual image showed up, and the header is actually still on the left, which we'll fix in a moment. But one of the things I want to do is actually want to take this entire H1 tag and move it to the right and to the middle vertically, essentially. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to add another class here, and it's going to basically say that any H1 tag inside of the coding fun section is going to be text aligned to the right. It's going to have a height of 100%, which basically is take up 100% of the height of the section, which is 170 pixels. We're going to specify position relative, and we're going to offset it from the top 40%, and we're going to actually move it from the right 100 pixels, so it's not all the way to the right. So as soon as we save that, you'll see that the content actually moved right here, and it's showing up in this area. Now, this is still not the perfect positioning, and I'll show you how we're going to adjust it as we begin to actually make this website a little bit more mobile friendly. So as you can see, the content is always in the same area, and then if we make it very small, it basically shows up right here. So I think we can do a little bit better, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. So let me go ahead and resize that again, and we'll go back to this page. Now the next area that we're going to focus on is actually the YouTube videos itself. And we're going to start off by creating this class called YouTube Videos. And this is actually representing that main container element, YouTube Videos. This is what's going to allow us to actually control the positioning a little bit better of that entire section. And I'll start off with creating the YouTube Videos and give it a padding at the top of 20 pixels, because you can see right now that this entire section is actually right basically it's butting up right against the section above it, and I want to provide a little bit more space in there. I'll go ahead and save this, and as soon as I do, it actually pushed it down just slightly. So the next section I'm going to worry about, or next class I'm going to worry about, is the actual h1 tag itself. And I'll add this YouTube video h1, and it's going to basically say go ahead and text align the actual h1 to the center. The font size is going to be 40 pixels, so we want to make it stand out. And we're going to also provide padding on the bottom of that h1 tag by 20 pixels to push the actual content down here a little bit further down. So I'll go ahead and save this. And you can see that now our YouTube videos header is actually much bigger, and we actually have some spacing from the top. So for the most part, this area is done. Now here's one thing that I wanted to add to make it a little bit actually better presented, and that is what's called a media tag. And the reason why we want to do this is because you'll notice that right now the content is actually to the left. On a bigger monitor, you actually would want it to be positioned on the center, and then when the users start actually making it smaller, you can see that the content actually begins to flow. So it actually gets to the next row, and if we actually resize it even further, you'll see that actually there's only one row. Now this is actually great for mobile devices, because people will be able to actually use mobile devices very easily then to see your content. It doesn't work very well for when you have a large screen or a monitor. You want to use as much space as possible in that case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a media tag or a media query CSS element in my CSS file to actually say whenever the area of your screen actually is above 1205 pixels, it's actually going to go ahead and change the sizing aspect so it actually centers this. Now why 1205? Well, so that's simply because that's the actual minimum width before this content begins to actually start flowing to the next row. So let's do that right now. And the way you do this is by creating this media screen and min width tag here. And this actually will allow us to override some of these classes here with different types of values depending on the screen size. So we'll start with this basically class that's video content. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually defining the div element that it contains these 4 cards called video content, and I'm going to specify the width for it, which is going to be 1205 pixels, and then I'm going to specify margin auto, which will actually force it to center automatically. So as soon as I save this, I'll go back here, you'll see that it actually saved it. Now if I start actually resizing this browser, you'll notice that the content starts flowing, and then as soon as it gets above that width of 1205, it actually begins to center as well. But as soon as it actually gets below that, it actually begins to flow, and you can see it's actually left aligned. So the last item that I want to take care of inside of this media query itself is actually the h1 tag. So remember before, actually have it aligned right here, and it would be nice is if you have a larger screen that you actually have this aligned more, to the left, or actually aligned with the last image here. So what I'm going to do is, in case that I actually do have this screen real estate, I'll actually default the padding instead of 100 pixels that we have right here. I'm going to go ahead and set it to 350 pixels. Now, as soon as that is no longer the case, I'm going to go ahead and reset it back to 100 pixels offset and let the actual content flow the way it wants to flow. So as soon as I save this, you'll notice that this H1 tag actually moved to the left, and it's actually much better aligned now. Now, if I resize this, you'll see that it still actually kind of aligns for the most part, depending on where you are now. It does jump a little bit, but this is already providing much better flowing of content for this website. So, and then when you get really small, basically there's nothing you can do about this, and well, you can, I guess, do a lot of things, but in this case, I think this is good enough for what we're trying to accomplish. So we have our content area actually defined, and the last part we have in this video is how to actually build a footer here. So let's go back to our application. I'll go ahead and close these files, and I'll go to the application footer HTML. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and define the actual footer section. And this footer section is actually going to be comprised of the footer element. I'll go ahead and close that. And in here, we're actually going to be using a construct of a UI grid. So this is actually another concept from Semantic UI. This allows you to use the column grid automatic positioning system that the Semantic UI grid framework provides you with. And also allows you to actually center the content as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create a div element. And you'll notice that I'm specifying a class of UI centered grid. So this will actually position all of the content in a center depending on what you have inside of it. So, and this is going to be actually a very basic section or a footer here, and what is going to comprise of is two columns. One is going to be 4 columns wide, the other one is going to be 5 columns wide, and the first one is going to contain some links to the different social media websites that I have, and the other one is just going to have some wording with a link back to my YouTube channel. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to start off with actually creating the first div, which is going to be the first column, and it's going to be 4 wide column, and it will have some text in it called find us. And inside of that, we're going to actually put in a UL element, or an ordered list. And this ordered list is basically going to be comprised of a few different links. So you'll see that pointing to a YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+. And the next section we're going to have is we're going to specify the thanks for visiting section. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and paste that whole section here. Format it, and what it has in here is it's given a class of 5 wide column, and then it has an H2 tag that basically says thanks for visiting, and then please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. And you'll notice that I'm actually using the Angular value for the clouddeveloper.io itself, which is actually a variable that's being passed in by our main template into this view. So something that I showed you about, I believe it was 2 videos ago. So in this particular case, if I actually go ahead and save this and reload this page, you'll notice that the actual footer shows up. Now the footer doesn't actually have any styling applied to it yet, and you can see it's white, so it's kind of making it difficult to actually see the content. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and actually start applying the styles to this. So I'll go ahead and open up the CSS file, and this one is fairly basic. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I'll show you, I'll kind of walk you through it real quick. So the footer area is actually given it the background of black, so we want the entire footer to be actually black. The color of the text we want to be white. We want to provide some padding at the top and bottom of 40 pixels. Left and right is going to be 0. we're going to position it fixed. And what this is actually going to do is position fixed will actually force the footer to always be in a position where we're telling it to, not relative, not based on any other content, but we're literally telling it we want you to be in this particular area, and that is bottom 0. Basically, we always want that content to be showing up on the bottom. We're going to give it a width of 100, and we're going to give it a z-index of -1. And the reason we're doing this is we wanted to have the lowest z-index of everything. And z-index is basically, how it stacks in terms of content. So anything that's lower in a z-index, so -1, -2, -3, anything basically in the normal numbering sequence, the lower the number, the farther back down it is, instead of the opposite way. So the higher the number, basically it goes higher and starts stacking up further, it's more visible. So not opacity, but which order it shows up. And if you remember that all of our other content was actually higher z-index, so of z-index 2 and 3, whereas this is -1, just simply so we force it to be back on the bottom. And then we actually changed the anchor tag colors to be orange, so any of the links will actually show up in orange color. And then we're saying in the unordered list, we want the list style to be none. And the reason why we want to do that is we don't actually want the bullets to show up for that. So you can actually see what the footer looks like now. And then margin left, this actually will force the content to move to the left, because if we actually show you real quick, if I comment this out, you'll see that it's actually moving to the right, and we want it to align with the find us wording. So I'll go ahead and save that again, and you'll see that now it actually says, or it's actually aligned to the left. So this is our footer section. Now this is where I wanted to show you the whole purpose of z-indexing things. So you'll notice that this content area actually, as we begin to scroll up, it actually will begin to take over the actual footer. So the effect is that reveal effect that we get for the footer, as though the footer doesn't exist, and all of a sudden it appears out of nowhere. So I think this is actually a pretty neat effect that I was able to find some people use on their website, and I really like this one. So you also notice that at the top, our actual logo, or our background behind our logo, is actually constantly static, and the actual logo itself moves, which actually creates a pretty neat effect as well. Now, we're almost done. I want to show you one last change that I want to make, and this is actually going to use a little bit of jQuery and JavaScript to actually make this actual logo a little bit more lively. What I mean by that right now is you can see when I scroll up and down, it actually moves with the page itself. What I'd like to do is actually, I want to have this actually move along with the page up until this section, until the story section, and then as it gets closer, actually I want it to start disappearing, not fading, but simply just hide, or similar to our footer where it reveals, and when it goes back it just gets hidden. I want to do something similar to the actual logo itself. And the way you do that is by actually adding some JavaScript. And we'll go ahead and actually open up our app component TS file, and we're going to make a small change to it by attaching to a window scroll event, and then based on the positioning of the user on the page, we're going to actually change the positioning of that image itself, or the logo itself. So the first thing we want to do is we actually want to add an initialization function to our component. So this way, as soon as it actually gets rendered on the screen, it will invoke a particular JavaScript function that we want to have and we want to use. And the way you do that is by adding this additional import statement for on init, and this is actually going to allow us to hook into that initialization or rendering aspect of this component. And then we're going to want to implement a specific interface, which is going to be on init. and you basically specify it by implements and then on init, and then you'll see here that actually will tell me that it doesn't actually have the ng on init in this component, and Visual Studio Code will be able to help me with this. I'll just go ahead and implement this, and it adds me this function. So I'll go ahead and reposition this real quick on the bottom. And in here, now Visual Studio Code, because I have a few different plugins, it doesn't like me using double quotes. It would like me to start using single quotes. So I'll go ahead and fix all of that. So you can see all of the single quotes got added here, and the double quotes got replaced. I'll go ahead and save this. And now what I want to do is actually I want to go ahead and replace the content of the ng on init function, and I need to be able to use jQuery. So I'll go ahead and actually specify the actual variable here. And this is something that I showed you before on how to use jQuery in your Angular application. You actually have to declare this variable here so that our TypeScript system doesn't actually complain about not knowing anything about this $sign variable. So now that I have that added, I'm going to go ahead and add a call here, and I'm going to attach to the scroll event, and I'm going to specify a function. And inside of this function, what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to retrieve the actual value of how far the actual user scrolled, so the offset from the top. And you do this by specifying this, and then scroll top, and this will actually give us that offset. And the next item that we're going to do is we're going to say add a basically find an element with a logo CSS class, and we'll actually specify a CSS value or attribute on it as well. So, and that's going to be transform, and it's going to the actual value of that transform is going to be translate, and it's going to be 0 pixels. And then we're going to specify double scroll. And then here's the important piece. Now, I've done some playing around for the particular website that I'm implementing, and the value of 1.53 works perfectly. In some cases, people actually divide instead of multiply. In this case, I'm actually multiplying because I actually want to speed up the scrolling effect for the content that I have. Now, some people actually want to slow the content down to not make it as abrupt, but for the purpose of what I'm trying to do, this actually works perfectly. So, and this will be the percentage. So I'll go ahead and specify this and go ahead and close that. So now, let's see, what is this complaining about? Right, so I actually should be specifying a plus here. As soon as I do that, it actually reloads. Now, this is all we needed to do. Now, the effect that this actually is producing is pay attention to this logo itself. As I start scrolling down, you'll notice that the actual logo itself is actually following us all the way to the bottom. As soon as we actually close, the actual image actually goes away, and now we can go to the next area of our website. So, and if you're actually using a scroll wheel, you'll notice that as soon as I actually close out of that section, that particular header is actually gone, and I just see the story. So I think this actually produces a really neat effect for the header of our website and makes it actually very pleasant to use. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you like this content, go ahead and leave a comment in the section below. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask those as well, and I'll respond as quickly as I can, and I will talk to you later.